Great, welcome everybody. We'll maybe give half a minute or so as people join. Looks like we've got some folks streaming in here. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get going this morning. Let's see, there's a recording in progress, is that correct? Great, okay. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining today. This webinar series is called Conversations on Ocean Carbon, a U.S. West Coast and Alaska Perspective, and it's co-hosted by the California Current Acidification Network, the Alaska Ocean Acidification Network, and the California Ocean Science Trust, with the aim to deliver the best available information on marine carbon dioxide removal, mCDR, and to explore concepts related to coastal ocean carbon. So we want to thank those of you who joined us for our first webinar on June 23rd, and you can find a recording of that one on YouTube. My name is Darcy Dugan. I'm with the Alaska Ocean Observing System and the Alaska Ocean Acidification Network, and I'm here today with my co-host, Lawrence Linsmeyer with the Ocean Science Trust, is going to be moderating our Q&A. Natalie Lord with the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program is making sure that our platform is running smoothly. And Alex Harper at CCAN is our other organizer who couldn't join us today. So we're working together to create a dialogue among industry members, tribes, natural resource managers, and scientists throughout the West Coast and Alaska ecosystems to provide a better understanding of mCDR technologies, limitations, risks, and also how to become engaged. During the webinar today, attendees will be in listen-only mode, so you can type questions into the question box at the bottom of the control panel, and we'll pose them to the speaker after the presentation, and we'll also be doing a couple of interactive poll questions. We're also recording this session, and we'll share the recording on the CCAN, Alaska Ocean Acidification Network, and Ocean Science Trust websites. So the title of today's session is A Tour of Newly Funded Marine Carbon Dioxide Removal mCDR Projects. And this presentation is going to cover 17 new projects that were recently awarded funding by NOPP, the National Ocean Partnership Program, and announced earlier this month. So this is going to provide a chance to get a look at the direction that things are moving with mCDR research and development. And then after the presentation, we'll move into a Q&A moderated by Lauren. Before we start, we'd like to ask two poll questions to get a sense of our group here today. So Natalie's going to put the first one on the screen. It's, did you attend the first webinar of the series in June that was an overview of marine CDR? So we'll give a moment for folks to click their answer. And I think Natalie can kind of see when this is starting to level out as far as responses. And there is the result. So it looks like we've got a lot of new folks today, which is great. Then our second question is, which region are you from? So you can go ahead and click that one. And once everyone has had a chance to do that, we'll see the results. Great. Thanks for those. We'll do two more questions later in the presentation. And so now I'll introduce our speaker. Our presenter today is Gabby Kitch. She's a marine geochemist who now uses her background as an Earth system scientist to lead NOAA's involvement in marine CDR research. And Gabby completed her PhD at Northwestern University, where she coupled her analytical work and research opportunities with the opportunity to engage in science policy, science communication, and management. And she became a Knaus Fellow focused on international policy with NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program, where she started supporting CDR efforts. So in her current CDR role at NOAA, Gabby manages the NOPP CDR research portfolio, supports the development of actions outlined in the new Ocean Climate Action Plan, participates in various domestic outreach activities, and continues to track international engagement in the mCDR space. So with that, I'll hand it over to Gabby for our presentation today.
Thank you so much, Darcy. And thank you all for attending today and your interest in learning more about the new NOPP portfolio. This is a really monumental effort that came to fruition out of the vision and staffing from NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program. And I'm really grateful to be the one taking on the role of managing this exciting portfolio. So today I'm going to give you a little bit more of the story behind this historic investment in marine CDR, and then I'll dig into some more of the details on the portfolio. In particular, this is kind of the outline of the talk here. So we'll go spend a few minutes on why we want to focus on marine CDR. And then we'll talk more about what is NOPP and what is the NOFO, all of these acronyms that might be new to some folks here. Then we'll dig into the portfolio. What projects are we actually funding here? And we'll focus on the West Coast and Alaska projects that might be of interest to this group here. And then finally, we'll talk about next steps and other funding opportunities that might be on the table for interested people to apply to. So I'll dig into why CDR. As many of you all know, the conversation around carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, has been growing. And in the most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC report, they state that manually removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through negative emission technologies, which CDR can be used almost anonymously here, is critical to stabilizing our climate at 1.5 degrees C of warming. So this is shown through this infographic here that was adapted from the IPCC and climate analytics from the World Resource Institute. And on the x-axis, we have time here. On the y, we have gigatons of CO2 per year. So you can see that we will keep emitting emissions throughout time. Current policies, which, based on the graph that you're looking at, might vary some, but we are kind of projected to keep emitting, and consuming energy for our livelihoods. So in order to get us to this navy curve here, that 1.5 degrees C warming, we need to first and foremost use conventional mitigation techniques of cutting emissions, moving to renewables, et cetera. Then we need to also invoke carbon removal approaches to get to our net zero goal and our climate goal. So that's what's outlined in the green here. And the carbon removal approaches can vary from techniques happening on land, such as planting more trees or direct air capture, which has been highlighted, especially with initiatives through the Department of Energy. And then, of course, we have a whole suite of marine or ocean-based carbon dioxide removal methods. These are some images from NOAA's CDR strategy, which I will talk about in a few slides here, but this just summarizes the number of different types of marine CDR research. So we have macroalgal cultivation, and I'm not going to go into many of the details of these different methods, but just summarize briefly what this method entails. So macroalgal cultivation involves growing seaweed and algae at the surface to absorb carbon dioxide and then likely sinking it to the seabed. We also have other biological techniques that involve ocean fertilization, either by means of direct input of nutrients to the ocean or by drawing up nutrients from the deep water, so artificial upwelling and then artificial downwelling. We also have more chemically based processes like ocean alkalinity enhancement, which has a number of different ways to actually achieve that addition of an alkaline substance into the ocean, which can then interact with the atmosphere and draw down more carbon from the atmosphere into the ocean. Lastly, we have direct ocean capture, which is akin to our terrestrial counterpart of direct air capture, where we're actually stripping CO2 from the water in this case, and then removing that CO2 into either the seabed or somewhere on land, utilizing it in a different way, et cetera. And for the sake of kind of background on our NOPP portfolio here, I don't include ecosystem restoration and conservation, which could be, a separate marine CDR strategy or technology, depending on what you are considering. And that will make more sense when I'm running through the priorities addressed in the NOFO, or the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Of course, there's been an increasing federal conversation around CDR and marine CDR. So this slide outlines some of the executive actions and also the White House reports that mention carbon dioxide removal and marine carbon dioxide removal. I specifically want to call attention to the Ocean Climate Action Plan, which was released in March of this year, 2023. And it outlines marine CDR as one of the major strategies of addressing climate change using the ocean as a solution. NOAA is mentioned as on a number of those actions as a lead agency, but there are also synergies with other interagencies, which we were really excited to see, especially in the context of this NOPP portfolio. So speaking of what NOAA has been increasingly interested in terms of carbon dioxide removal, NOAA does have an internal carbon dioxide removal task force or task team, which includes over 60 plus NOAA researchers and program managers from across the different NOAA line offices. In June of 2023, this year, we released our strategy for NOAA carbon dioxide removal research. This report is very involved, and it goes through a number of different parts where we talk about the federal motivation, which of course we talked about in the last slide. We'll also have a review of CDR techniques and the science. It also goes into NOAA's assets for CDR research and a vision of CDR research at NOAA. Just to briefly touch on NOAA's CDR research, and thank you, Natalie, for placing those in the chat. So I invite you to please go look at that link or the QR code that was on the previous slide to look through the report and gather your own takeaways. But to outline a few of them here, I'll just go over kind of part 2 and part 3 to cover both kind of a review of CDR techniques and science. Many reports capture this information in different ways. I think one of the main highlights of the NOAA CDR research strategy is this great plot, figure 1B here. And granted, there are quite amount of an uncertainty around these different variables, but I'm going to walk you through this just briefly so that you can revisit it on your own time. So we have the cost range on the x-axis and the effectiveness, gigatons of CO2 removed, on the y-axis. And we have plotted, different techniques, and this includes the 9 different techniques that we covered in the CDR strategy, so both atmospheric and marine methods. And we look at, of course, the effectiveness and the cost of these different methods here. So we have plotted these in kind of 4 different quadrants, which is low cost, potentially low efficacy or effectiveness, low cost and high effectiveness at removing carbon from the atmosphere, high cost and high effectiveness, and high cost and low effectiveness. The shading corresponds to potential NOAA impact, which just means, the potential for NOAA to get involved, which relates to these assets that I'll go over next. And the size of the bubble corresponds to our prescribed duration, or the number of years that this carbon would be stored using these different techniques. So there's a ton of information embedded in this figure. I hope you spend some time looking at it yourself and digesting it. And then to move on to our key NOAA assets, a full table that outlines in way more detail all the NOAA assets is located in table 2 of NOAA's CDR strategy, but I've just pulled out some main highlights here. So essentially, NOAA's assets, and there's about 13 of them outlined in the strategy, can be grouped into these 4 different buckets. So NOAA, has kind of gold standard observing networks, so the global and local ocean and atmospheric observing, and along with our technological development, could be leveraged and adapted to support the growing CDR ecosystem. We also have state-of-the-art modeling, scaling, and projections, and those could be redefined and refitted for CDR pathways. So that includes both Earth system and process study models. Of course, we have a whole research arm dedicated and intersecting with different line offices focused on environmental impacts. So this could include actual monitoring and experimental designs focused on ecosystem impacts, but also modeling and other laboratory research. Finally, we have many decision support products within NOAA that could be adapted and expounded upon for marine CDR and CDR more generally, such as our data management tools, marine spatial planning, aquaculture research, and also our collaborative and conservation research. So I encourage you to check out the CDR strategy. If you have any other questions, also feel free to reach out if you want to talk more about the strategy. All right, so moving over to the funding opportunity, I'll also stress that while NOAA has been focused on developing their strategy for engaging in CDR research, this is an interest of many other agencies as well. So many agencies started talking to each other in separate interagency working groups and started looking towards a path to collaborate and really make an impact towards marine CDR research. So with that, the agencies look towards the National Oceanographic Partnerships Program, or the NOPP. And since 1997, NOPP has funded over 200 projects that address ocean and climate science, climate adaptation and change, education, economic development, quality of life, and national security. So in that framework, the partners felt like it was a really great mechanism to leverage in order to support marine CDR funding. More exciting, part of NOPP's mission is also to bring together federal agencies, academia, and industry for ocean science research, which is really pertinent for effective marine CDR research. And it is an avenue to leverage different federal agencies' resources on topics that cross agency mission lines. So this is a really great mechanism, again, to support the diversity of interests in marine CDR research. And I just want to highlight too that in last fiscal year, so fiscal year 22, so last year, the NOPP got together and actually supported one project, which is titled the Electrochemical Acid Sequestration to Ease Ocean Acidification, or EASE OA. And this is funded through NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program, of course, with a match from the National Oceanographic Partnerships Program, or NOPP. Also a generous philanthropic donation or contribution from ClimateWorks Foundation, and also the Department of Energy's Water Power Technology Office. So with this funding, we supported the research partners outlined here, and this project actually just got Ebb Carbon system running up in Squim Bay, so that's in the Pacific Northwest, and that system is online. There's lots of news surrounding this exciting development, both on NOAA's research site and also on Ebb Carbon's site and various other news sources. So I invite you to go check that out. And also, I think it's important to recognize that this is kind of the first project that's a part of this NOPP portfolio in a way, dating back a year now. So what happened to support this 2023 call was all these agencies listed on the slide, and I'll go through them in a moment, got together and raised $24.3 million together. And this includes $15 million from the Inflation Reduction Act. I'll speak more about the Inflation Reduction Act on the next slide here when we highlight our press release. So quickly give credit to these wonderful partners here. So this process was led on behalf of NOPP by NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program. The Integrated Ocean Observing System at NOAA also were the ones that contributed a lot of these Inflation Reduction Act funds. The Global Ocean Monitoring and Observing Program at NOAA also contributed to this call. NSF Ocean Science Division also contributed. The Office of Naval Research, ClimateWorks Foundation again, and then Department of Energy, we had contributions both from the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management and the Water Power Technology Office. So we're really, really grateful to all of these partners, and you'll see that this variety of partners also shaped the diversity of the portfolio and the diversity of the priorities that we listed. So in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act and Marine CDR, as many of you probably know, the Inflation Reduction Act was one of the largest climate investments made by the Biden-Harris administration and really in congressional history. So NOAA is lucky we're fortunate enough to receive some of these Inflation Reduction Act funds, specifically coming through the U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System at NOAA. And those funds are really meant to be focused on understanding coastal communities and climate resilience. So if you want to learn more about IU's priorities under this kind of coastal communities and climate resilience bin, I invite you to look at that second link here. And then also I want to highlight, there's a number of different press releases around this topic that provide more information about Inflation Reduction Act and the general NOPP portfolio. So this QR code here has the NOAA-wide press release, and then the first direct link from the Ocean Acidification Program, which I'll highlight throughout this slide, has another news story about these awards. So definitely feel free to go read those if you haven't seen them already. So to get into the nitty-gritty details about the portfolio and what priorities the portfolio addressed, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which we often call NOFOs. If you would like to read the NOFO yourself, you're more than welcome to do that and scan this QR code. I will warn you, it's about 33 pages, so I'll just give you the summary here. But we outlined 7 main priorities that called for research on the co-benefits, field deployments, modeling, as well as community engagement around marine CDR in particular. And these priorities were really to address the following questions listed here. So, such as previously identified research gaps on marine carbon dioxide removal research, such as what was outlined in the National Academy's report on ocean-based CDR. Also the risks and co-benefits of marine CDR, including ocean acidification mitigation, right? So these are both potential positive and negative impacts of marine CDR. And then lastly, the science needed to build regulatory frameworks for the testing and scaling of marine carbon dioxide removal. And these priorities were really co-developed by the funding partners along with the rest of the NOFO. So you'll see that these priorities are quite wide in range and quite diverse. And just as a note, the Notice of Funding Opportunity followed pretty closely to what other funding opportunities look like coming out of NOAA and the Ocean Acidification Program. But we did request that applicants submit a monitoring, reporting, and verification plan along with a permitting plan if they were planning to deploy or pilot, some of these marine CDR technologies. So what does the portfolio look like? And I want to highlight again, we were able to support, 17 different projects, and the number of unique institutions and principal investigators we were able to support. Those large numbers are largely in part to the NOPP requirements, again, to include a federal agency, academic, and industry partner. So a requirement to be eligible for this call is that you had to have a partnership with at least 2 of those entities. We'll quickly go through just logo slides of the different partners so you can get a sense for the different universities involved. So these are all the academic partners, both the PIs and the co-PIs here. Just give you some moments to absorb. And then the private industry partners are listed here. Private industry was also described as NGOs. So those NGOs are listed on this slide here. And then we lastly have our government partners that round out the eligibility criteria. So what do these look like in a spatial scale? These are some maps that outline, again, both the co-PIs or the PIs and the co-PIs. You can see that a number of them are located on the West Coast and also grouped up in the Northeast. The size of that bubble really corresponds to the number of PIs. We also had a co-PI based in Japan. So international co-PIs were allowed as long as a domestic lead PI submitted the proposal and would continue to manage the proposal. And I also want to give thanks to Kalina Grab from NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program, who has compiled all of these graphics moving forward. All right, so to get into what the funded NOPP portfolio addresses, we can look through this bar chart here. So you'll see those 7 priorities outlined here. Again, if you were to map these back onto the NOFO, that would be directly pulled out of the 7 priorities written out in that notice funding opportunity. We have, those that focus on co-benefits, mostly ocean acidification mitigation, but also a project that considers energy sources. And anything in white was in a priority that was written into the NOFO, but there was not a funded proposal that addressed that priority. We also have systems analysis, so to deal with scaling of marine carbon dioxide removal and also techno-economic assessments. We have projects that focus on modeling. So some of those projects focus on the carbonate chemistry, some of those focus on the ecosystem impacts of marine CDR, and others, or one project really focuses on where marine carbon dioxide research might be happening and where the best places for that to happen. We have a number of different priorities that fall under the methods section. So we have a few technological development projects, a number of different field-based projects, one mesocosm study, one lab-based study, and one observing system simulation experiment that we grouped into the methods section. I'll note here, because this is one of our highest number of projects that address this priority, that the counts here are not, like one project could have addressed multiple priorities. And so you'll see that multiple projects are counted in different criteria. And that's why we have 20 projects that fall under this method section when we really funded 17. And this will be a theme that carries throughout these different bar charts that I'll show today. We also have one project that looks at marine energy technology that will be highlighted here because it falls under the West Coast portfolio. And then we have a number of studies that address those National Academies research priorities. So this is where we grouped any study that also addresses environmental impacts or species response. Lastly, the 7th priority had to do with holding workshops and for community building. So we have a number of workshops that address the social licensing around marine CDR or the community buy-in, and then also a workshop focused on governance and permitting. So if we look at these projects that include any type of community engagement that might fall within that priority 7, but also there are other projects that wanted to talk directly with different user groups or produce a product that would be useful to different user groups, and those are also binned within community engagement. We have 7 projects that fit that criteria. We have 8 field-based projects that are outlined in the full NOPP portfolio. And those include those doing field research for monitoring and biological experiments, et cetera, along with those that are actually going to be piloting a marine CDR strategy. We also have 6 studies that are based in the lab. We have, again, that one mesocosm study, and then 5 modeling studies that vary in terms of modeling chemistry and modeling the biological or ecosystem impact. Lastly, we can look at the marine CDR method types that were funded. And from here, we can see there are a few projects that focus on macroalgae, one project that focuses on kind of biomass sinking, and that's a modeling project. So looking at the effects of biomass sinking on ecosystems. The majority of the portfolio is funding ocean alkalinity enhancement, experiments, modeling, laboratory studies, et cetera. And again, we kind of group the different methods within OAE or ocean alkalinity enhancement to include, those that address enhanced weathering or electrochemical approaches. We have one study that focuses on ocean iron fertilization. Again, another modeling study akin to the one that I mentioned for biomass sinking that just looks at the feasibility, ecosystem impacts, et cetera. So now we can kind of focus in on the West Coast here. And get into a few more of the project details. I wish I had time to highlight all of the project details, but please visit those news stories to read through the projects that are based outside of the West Coast. So we're zooming in here to focus on where the PIs and co-PIs are located here on the West Coast. And we can add in another map here on the right which outlines just the lead PIs on the West Coast and includes those that are also doing field studies on the West Coast. Sorry, West Coast here. So the ones with the orange squares are field studies. You'll see lines heading off elsewhere. So those lines connect back to their institutions. So you can see that their institutions are not based on the West Coast. And then we have the other lead PIs here that are going to be doing some work at their institutions. I will note that one of the PIs that's located at Scripps will be doing field work, but is not based on the West Coast. So as you can see, this is a really diverse, complex portfolio. So we've tried to do our best to highlight these nuances here and focus in on the projects that will be happening on the West Coast. Okay, so we can revisit our priority slide here, and we can toggle between these in the full portfolio and those on the West Coast. So I'll be toggling back and forth here so you can see the differences. And I also want to, when we move to the West Coast, highlight again, as I did in the previous slide, that the counts, which are again, multiple projects, or projects can be counted towards multiple priorities. These counts are just from those that are doing their research, field lab or modeling implications on the West Coast. So you'll see, we'll walk through these in more details to try to get at some of these nuances, but just to provide some context to what these counts mean. So if we toggle between the overall priorities met and these West Coast priorities, you can see that on the West Coast, the modeling priority actually jumps out as the highest frequency here. Methods is a close second. And there's also quite a few that address the priority 7, putting on workshops for community development. I'll also note that the one marine energy project here, noticing that these counts are different on the West Coast only bar graph, but the marine energy project, like I mentioned, is located at OSU, so is located on the West Coast. Great. So we can revisit all of our bar graphs for these different ways of looking at our NOPP portfolio. We can look at, again, the methodology types, and you can see that the mesocosm study drops out since it's located in Hawaii. And we do have a lot of community engagement projects. So there's 4 unique projects that are focused on some type of community engagement, including those that will address priority 7 and putting on workshops. And looking at the marine CDR methods, we have a lot that address ocean alkalinity enhancement. Our ocean iron fertilization project drops out. It's located on the East Coast. And then the macroalgae project focuses on exactly that macroalgae instead of biomass sinking. So with our remaining time, I really want to focus on breaking these projects up and talking about a few more specifics of each project. So you'll see them outlined on these slides. There's 7 different projects that we're going to highlight in kind of the West Coast, Alaska portfolio. So both of these are modeling projects highlighted here, led by PIs McKinley and Kearney, whose so McKinley's feature is highlighted here on the left hand of the slide, and then Kearney is highlighted on the right hand. And the McKinley project on the left will determine the natural background carbon uptake, its variability, and the degree of certainty which with it is known in areas where mCDR removal projects are likely to occur. This project will also determine the requirements for additional sampling of things like CO2 and other types of carbonate chemistry measurements in order to quantify where we need more data for these baseline measurements that can be then incorporated back into modeling activities. And in this way, this project is hoping to inform the investment in ocean observing related to marine CDR. This project will also develop marine learning approaches to be utilized for future monitoring, reporting, and verification of marine CDR. I'll point out that this PI is not based on the West Coast, but again, there's global implications and we'll have implications for the West Coast in particular. PI Kearney's team will use simulations from 2 different model frameworks to identify the range of reduced efficacy that could come from calcification. So this is also referred to leakage in the CDR community, and simulations will be based on proposed real-world applications of marine CDR removal. And in this way, this project really hopes to inform carbon markets, prices, discounts, etc. Moving forward for the field-based projects that we highlighted, we'll be focusing on projects led by PI Subash and PI Ho. So again, those are on the left and the right side of the slide, respectively. And PI Subash will be leading a novel deck-side incubation method for coccolithophores and diatoms. And he'll be leveraging a National Science Foundation Global Convergence research cruise that's planned for the spring of 2024. He will then use the same methods as are explored on this GCR cruise during a ocean alkalinity enhancement field trial on the Northeast that has been previously funded. Principal Investigator Ho will use a novel tracer method to track the evolution of alkalinity enhancement field projects in the San Francisco Bay. The sample plan will be heavily informed by models, and then the models will then be used after the field experiment to assess the efficacy of the alkalinity addition and removing carbon from the atmosphere. So Ho touches on a lot of different, it's one of those projects that falls into a lot of the different priorities. They have the field-based component, the modeling component, and then in addition, they also have this community engagement component where the project will engage the public in a workshop and will produce a best practices guide for community engagement. If we look to the laboratory experiments, which are led by PI Hales and PI Dixon, again, on the left and the right side of the screen, we can look into some of the details there. So PI Hales will be working on a new method to deliver alkalinity to the ocean that would be powered by marine energy. And this project also intersects with a community engagement outcome to build a regulatory strategic roadmap for ocean alkalinity enhancement. PI Dixon will also be working on a new spin on ocean alkalinity enhancement where they will use a CO2-rich stream from captured carbon to generate carbonate salts for ocean alkalinity enhancement. So lastly, in our captured bin for the West Coast Alaska portfolio, we can talk about our community engagement projects. And I'm highlighting, even though there are intersections between the other projects I highlighted in previous slides, I wanted to call particular attention to PI Hogan's project that will be working with fishing communities on the West Coast, Alaska, and also the Northeast. And the hope is to produce 3 guidance documents around the best practices for siting, including recommendations of criteria for project evaluation and permitting, methods to engage the commercial and fishermen as co-producers of necessary data from observing system and ecosystem impact studies, and also ways to engage the fishermen community in culturally appropriate ways. So if this piqued your interest in learning more about the features of the different projects, I invite you to go to the OAP website. Our wonderful communications lead, Liz Perotti, developed a method where we could highlight each funded project from the OAP, and you can actually sort it now by project type. So there's a button to click for carbon dioxide removal, and then you can actually sort it by region. So if you're curious as to what research is going on in your region, definitely check out this project search function on the OAP's website. Moving into the last part of our agenda here today for this talk, we're going to talk about some next steps and what we are doing now with the NOPP portfolio. So NOAA is going to continue to lead, and NOAA OAP specifically will continue to lead coordination for the NOPP PIs as a whole, so these 17 projects, and also the funding partners. A few other agencies will be managing some awards on their own. So NOAA has a majority of the portfolio to manage as well, but other agencies like the U.S. National Science Foundation or NSF, the Office of Naval Research or ONR, and the Climate Works Foundation will also serve as managers of certain grants. And of course, NOAA will continue to engage with the Environmental Protection Agency to discuss permitting pathways. And I encourage you all, if you are interested in learning more about the permitting pathways for marine CDR research in particular, please reach out to an EPA Office of Water contact, Stina McCrory. Her email is outlined or listed here. And I think she would be happy to guide you through the permitting process as it stands. And of course, NOAA will continue to collaborate with our Department of Energy colleagues with new initiatives, which I will talk about in a few slides here as well, and highlight one specific funding opportunity that we're happy to partner with them on. So to highlight some other activities happening at interagency groups, I want to plug the CCO2 effort happening at ARPA-E. So CCO2 stands for Sensing Exports of Anthropogenic Carbon Through Ocean Observing. And this program seeks to accelerate the development of mCDR, the mCDR industry, specifically by focusing on measurement, reporting, and verification or validation. There's always argument as to what the MRV actually stands for, but those kinds of technologies. So here's the link on the slide here, but also wanted to include the slide provided by Simon Freeman, which I find super helpful about what CCO2 is trying to accomplish here. So they're trying to, again, accelerate these MRV technologies for marine CDR, the marine CDR industry. And it matters because really marine CDR, a large question around addressing the efficacy, permanence, et cetera, of all of these technologies is monitoring, reporting, and verification. And there are fundamental questions as outlined in the National Academy's report around the efficacy. You also saw those kind of large error bars on NOAA CDR strategy as well that have to do with the effectiveness of each of these strategies. So investment in these marine CDR MRV technologies is critical. And we're glad that ARPA-E has invested $45 million in 3 years to try to move these technologies forward into the market. The Department of Energy also has a number of funding opportunities that might intersect or do intersect with marine CDR. So the Water Power Technology Office has their Power at Sea Prize, which awards a number of different groups listed here money to support marine energy projects connected to fueling different initiatives, and this includes marine CDR technologies. So using kind of similar to the HALES project, using marine energy to fuel marine CDR technologies, and this could be on the monitoring, reporting, verification side, or the actual act of marine CDR and addition of substances to the ocean. So you can learn more at this link here. And then the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management also has a few opportunities that might be of interest to this community. The first is actually a notice of intent for carbon negative shot pilots. So the carbon negative shot is a DOE initiative to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it at a gigaton scale for less than $100 net metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, right? And in the carbon negative shot notice of intent, there's an area of interest for marine CDR pilots. So you can learn more at their funding opportunity announcement listed here. And then there's also these carbon utilization procurement grants, which includes language about products derived from the ocean. So this is a really neat initiative where the federal government, DOE, is actually buying carbon credits in order to better understand the processes, the hangups, obstacles, et cetera. And concept papers are accepted at any point in the submission process, and full applications close in April of 2024. Lastly, I just want to highlight a Dear Colleague letter from the National Science Foundation, which is titled Carbon Dioxide Removal and Solar Radiation Modification Strategies, Science, Governance, and Consequences. This is written by the Directorates of Geosciences with Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences and the Office of International Science and Engineering. And this seeks to encourage proposals on the fundamental understanding and assessment of environmental processes and our social, cultural, and ethical impacts of these topics listed here. So not necessarily a new funding opportunity dedicated, or not a new funding opportunity dedicated to these topics, but rather an encouragement from these other entities. And then NOAA has a number of funding opportunities out that might intersect marine CDR. I also just want to highlight this opportunity is actually closed at this point, but want you to keep your eyes out for various announcements and things like that on the Ocean-Based Climate Resilience Accelerators. So this is the related program to the IRA, or Inflation Reduction Act funds, that NOAA received for this marine CDR NOPP call. It's a really interesting program to accelerate kind of development in the ocean science space. So I invite you to check out more information on that through this link here. NOAA Fisheries also has a notice of funding opportunity out. This one is specifically focused on habitat restoration and resilience for tribes and underserved communities. So these applications are due on December 19th. And there's a webinar today, actually, from 3 to 4 Eastern. So if you're really interested in participating in this, I think it's a really exciting opportunity to invest in those communities. Of course, NOAA also supports the Small Business Innovation and Research Grants, which are only applicable to a select group and those small businesses, but phase 1 applications are likely open in the fall. And I encourage you to sign up for the mailing list, which is incorporated or included here in this link. I know that they are more than happy to receive marine CDR proposals from small businesses here. With that, thank you all for listening to this tour of federal investments. We could again talk for an hour more about the rest of the projects, but I encourage you to look at all of those resources that the OAP team has put together to highlight those the great rest of the portfolio.
Great, thank you so much for your presentation, Gabby. We're gonna have an opportunity to answer questions that have come in for Gabby, but real quick, we're gonna do a poll question. And Natalie is gonna put that up on our screen. We're curious, what brought you to this webinar today on NOPP funded mCDR projects? So if you can click through that for a moment, we'll view the results and then move on to Q&A with Lauren. Okay, a couple more seconds for anyone that hasn't clicked. Great. So there's the results from our group. So it looks like the majority of people are not personally involved with one of these projects, either on the implementation or funding side, but are interested in tracking this. Thanks, Natalie. And thanks all for filling out the poll. And I'm gonna hand it over to Lauren to moderate Q&A.
Great, thanks so much, Darcy and Gabby, for that really fantastic presentation and overview. Also, an incentive for folks to continue to stick around for this to the very end. We'll have one more poll question at the end to hear from you all what else you'd like to see from this webinar series. So now with a bit of time for some questions, and a reminder to folks to please add any questions you have for Gabby in the questions box. While we wait for questions to stream in, Gabby, one question I have is, a lot of the projects that you mentioned that NOAA and other NOPP partners are funding is developing and testing different mCDR methods. And that is obviously really important as we need to be able to evaluate which methods and strategies are most effective at achieving actual CO2 storage and permanent storage. And so if you could go into how is NOAA or other NOPP partners going to evaluate the effectiveness and safety of the different mCDR strategies that are being developed in this portfolio?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Lauren. So, the PIs themselves have outlined in their proposals methods to produce different publications. And also I'll stress that, being funded by the federal government, all of their data needs to be publicly accessible. And so I think it would be great, with OAP's portfolio, we funded a number of different projects, and then in future years, we funded products to create data synthesis products off of those previously invested projects and research. So I could envision a similar, hopeful similar trajectory here, where with the accessible data, then others could create data synthesis products. Many of the PIs themselves have already spoke to that in their proposals about creating those products to wrap up their projects and make them make a synthesis product themselves. As for evaluating, exactly the effectiveness and safety, I think that's a conversation that's still being had among different agencies, and who will have the final call on those types of things is still a very open question.
I completely understand, and I think we're all looking forward to understanding more how different agencies view, what an effective strategy looks like, and then how that will inform information can support decision makers in determining the future of mCDR for society. So we have some audience questions coming in. Fantastic. And let's see. So many of the funded proposals are focused on methods, as we just mentioned. How much of that funding is for actual implementation? There was a link to the EPA near the end. And so how will implementation be permitted within the program timeline?
Yeah, so implementation versus research scale pilots are kind of different categories here. And right now we're really at just the research size pilots. So again, that's going to be a big question of like where exactly that line is moving from research to implementation. And as for permitting schemes, that's again outside of the purview of NOAA. So I think that will be conversations that will be had, at high levels across different federal entities that would be involved in that kind of implementation scale permitting. So right now, we're just focused on research scale permitting and trying to, we are, like I said, working closely with the Environmental Protection Agency in order to get those types of permits through so that the PIs can realize their research scale projects. And as for implementation, I can't speak too much to that right now, unfortunately.
Great, thanks, Gabby. Another audience question we got is, of the 17 funded projects, do any conduct direct ocean capture methods through membranes, electrolysis, or other methods? And maybe for those in the audience who may not have heard of direct ocean capture, if you'd be able to give a quick explanation.
Yeah, of course. So direct ocean capture, I think the explanation I gave, it was very vague and in the beginning, which is very similar to direct air capture, just for those who are familiar with that. So that's involved, it either chemically strips, so through like electrolysis, or through, again, like the question posed through membranes, to remove the carbon dioxide off of the seawater. And then that carbon dioxide would either go into an acid stream, be used for other products, et cetera. And so you're left with the CO2 depleted seawater. And there's other things that can happen in the post-processing from direct air capture as well. So that's the gist of it. We are funding one project. Actually, the Navy ONR picked this one up as well. So within the NOPP portfolio, but it's being managed by ONR. Funding one project that looks at direct ocean capture in conjunction with desal plants, which I think is really exciting. And previous studies that have come out have suggested that direct ocean capture will be really only feasible when paired with those other types of needs to produce water and those types of things from certain regions, because it's expensive technique. Yeah.
Okay, I was just going to ask a follow-up if the need or preference for coupling those with already existing intake of water is due to the ease of already having a pre-permitted intake pipe, or if it's a cost issue or a combination.
Yeah, definitely a combination of both, but I think cost, at least in the research literature, has been a big point that's been called upon.
Great, thank you. Moving right along, so you touched on how NOAA and the NOPP funding is supporting field trials. And you may have also mentioned a recent letter by over 200 scientists, including climate, ocean, and environmental scientists, that call for accelerated and responsible research, including field testing on mCDR. So could you go a little bit deeper into how field trials and testing, responsible controlled field trials and testing, will help address some of the priority research needs highlighted by NOAA and the scientific community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is also the National Academy's report, again, from ocean-based CDR, calls on these kind of scaled implementation of, or scaled research for marine carbon dioxide removal research. So a lot of this marine CDR research has been happening through modeling activities, through now we're moving kind of into like laboratory-based experiments and other kind of larger tank experiments, and those have shown certain results which are really meaningful and impactful. This is kind of also how other fields developed, moving through the scaled approach. But I think now we're really at the point to move this more like theoretical research into seeing the impacts of kind of a larger, slightly larger scale, right? So when you're introducing things into the ocean, there's a lot more complications and indirect effects and things like that. So, yeah, we have a budding research foundational knowledge kind of the efficacy, but also things like environmental impacts now. And I think this grouping of projects does a really great job of kind of bridging this gap and starting to bridge this gap and starting to incentivize, controlled, responsible field trials, which often means short time scales, et cetera, very careful monitoring.
Great, thanks so much, Gabby. And unfortunately, I think we'll have to wrap the questions there, but really appreciate the rest of the audience questions. And I'm sure Gabby and us would be happy to try to follow up with folks after.
Yeah, my email's here, so feel free to reach out.
Great, thanks, Gabby. And so we have one more quick poll question for everybody. And this is around which marine CDR topics would you all like to see covered in future webinars in this series? Great, that's probably enough time for folks' responses, and wonderful. I remember last time we had a nice spread of interest, and it looks like, again, there's a lot of interest in learning all of these different things. So we will continue with this series and hope to address all of these important topics moving forward. And on behalf of all of us, I'd really like to thank our wonderful speaker again, Gabby Kitch, for this fantastic overview and presentation. And thank you all so much for attending this webinar today. We welcome any feedback, further questions, or suggestions for topics in the future. A recording of this webinar will be available on the CCAN, Alaska OA Network, and California Ocean Science Trust websites. We will also ask Gabby if she's willing to share a copy of her slides after. And we will send around an email announcing the next webinar very soon. With that, thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.